Arizona Territory, 1882. The sun was barely up when the stagecoach wheel split on a sharp bend, sending Naomi Renshaw tumbling down the side of Echo Canyon in a scream and a blur of tan dust. She hit the slope hard, dress tearing, bonnet gone, and slid until thick brush caught her like a net. The shouts of the driver and passengers grew smaller as the coach disappeared around the bend, then silence, just the wind whispering through canyon rock. Naomi groaned, blinking against the sun. Her hands shook as she tried to sit up. Blood trickled from her temple, and the slope was too steep to climb back up without help. She was 22, meant to be married in 3 days' time to a man she had only met twice, a banker in Prescott with thin lips and colder eyes. Now she was alone in a canyon with no idea which direction led to safety. A hawk called somewhere above. Her mouth was dry. She looked around, heart pounding. No water. No way up. Just red rock, cactus, and sky. She pressed her hand to her ribs, bruised, but not broken. Her satchel had ripped free in the fall, lying a few feet below. She crawled to it, pulling it close. Inside, a small tin of crackers, a folded letter from her sister in Ohio, and a photograph of her late parents. Nothing useful. Naomi closed her eyes. "Do not cry," she whispered. "You are not weak." She tied her skirts, pulled her boots tight, and began limping along the canyon floor, praying it would lead her out. 3 miles east, Archer Zane was on his way back to his ranch with a day's worth of supplies tied to his saddle. He spotted the broken wheel tracks first, then the sharp marks in the dirt where something or someone had gone tumbling. He dismounted, crouched low, and studied the trail. "Too steep for a horse," he muttered. He rubbed his jaw, then pulled a coil of rope from his saddle and started down on foot. It was not long before he saw her small figure in a torn traveling dress, hair tangled, one hand gripping a canyon wall for support. She looked up, eyes wide. "Ma'am," Archer called out, raising both hands so she would not startle. "Are you hurt?" Naomi froze. Dust clung to her cheeks, and she blinked like she was not sure if he was real. Yes," she rasped. "The coach it broke. I saw." He moved closer, careful. "I can help you out of here. Name's Archer Zane. I live about 5 miles north." She sagged with relief. "Naomi Renshaw. I think I twisted my ankle." He nodded once. "Let me carry you. There's no easy way out." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. He stepped forward, strong arms wrapping around her with surprising gentleness. She was light, and he could feel the tremble in her limbs. "Hold on," he said. Her arms went around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered. By the time they reached the canyon rim, the sun was high and her skin was flushed from the heat. Archer's horse, Dusty, stood waiting. He helped her into the saddle and walked beside her, steady hand on her leg to keep her balanced. "You live alone?" Naomi asked, voice faint. "Yeah, got a cabin near Sycamore Creek. Quiet place." She swallowed hard. "I was headed to Prescott. To be married." Her voice cracked. "I do not know what to do." "You do not have to decide anything today," he said. "First, let's get you water and rest." Archer's cabin was simple but clean. He brought in cool water from the well and let her bathe behind a drawn curtain, leaving her alone until she called out. "I am decent," Naomi said, wrapped in one of his clean shirts that fell nearly to her knees. He turned, arms crossed over his chest. "You should lie down. You need rest. I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." She looked up at him, eyes soft but tired. "Why are you being so kind?" He shrugged. "Because it is right." She nodded, silent for a long beat. Then, "Thank you." He brought her food stew and cornbread and kept the fire low. As night came, she sat on the edge of the cot and stared into the flames. "I am not going back to Prescott," she said quietly. He looked up from where he was rolling out a blanket. "You sure?" "I never wanted it. It was arranged. I thought I had no choice." She met his eyes. "But falling into that canyon, it felt like a door closing. And now I am here." Archer did not speak for a long time. He just nodded and added another log to the fire. Later, while she slept, he sat by the hearth, watching her chest rise and fall beneath the blanket. Something in him shifted. He had lived alone for 7 years, lost his folks to fever, ranched this land with calloused hands and quiet days. But the way Naomi had leaned into him, trusted him, he had not felt that kind of purpose in years. The next morning, she woke to the smell of biscuits and bacon. Her ankle still ached, but she managed to walk with his help. "I want to earn my stay," she said. "I can cook, sew, clean. You do not owe me anything," Archer said. She looked at him, eyes steady. I want to. He nodded. From that day on, Naomi stayed. She started with small chores, sweeping, tending to his few chickens, reading by the window while her ankle healed. Archer gave her space, but always noticed her. The way she hummed when she cooked. The way she smiled at the sound of wind in the trees. One morning, as he chopped wood, she stepped outside in her bare feet, sun catching her hair. You need help? She asked. He looked at her, an axe in his hand, and something caught in his chest. No, he said. But I like you near. She blushed. I like being near. He set the axe down. Neither of them moved. The air was still. She stepped closer. I have not felt safe in a long time. He met her eyes. I want you to. Her hand brushed his. He took it, his grip firm, warm. Neither spoke again, but they stood like that for a long time, side by side under the wide Arizona sky. Naomi had never held a hoe before. She wore one of Archer's old flannel shirts tucked into a skirt she'd sewn from feed sacks, and the sleeves were rolled high on her arms as she worked beside him in the garden behind the cabin. The sun rode high, not yet burning, and the smell of damp earth mixed with the scent of wild sage growing along the fence line. You see how the beans lean in? Archer said, pressing his thumb to the base of one stalk. They'll climb if we give him something steady. She planted the stick as he showed her, nodding once. I've never grown anything, she said. You will now. His voice was quiet but sure, and she looked at him differently, then not as a rescuer or a stranger, but as a man rooted deep in his land. By the end of the morning, her back ached and her palms were raw, but she hadn't stopped smiling. She washed her face at the pump while Archer filled a bucket for the mule. His shirt clung to his back, dark with sweat, and she watched him a long moment before turning away. Inside, she boiled coffee on the stove and sliced bread from the loaf she'd baked the day before. When he stepped in, brushing grit from his boots, she handed him the cup without a word. He nodded thanks, then sat across from her at the small pine table. You always this quiet? She asked, taking a sip of her own. He glanced out the window. Used to be noisier. Before. She waited. My brother, Miles. He lived on the next ridge over. He passed 3 winters back. There was no tremble in his voice, just a stillness. I'm sorry, she said. He liked to talk. Played the fiddle like the devil himself. After he died, it got real quiet out here. I guess I let it stay that way. She set her cup down. I used to be loud. My sister said I never stopped singing. After our parents passed, I just stopped hearing the music. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding. That evening, Naomi walked alone to the edge of the north pasture. The wind carried the faint cry of coyotes from the hills, and dusk settled in shades of lavender and rust. She sat on a flat stone and watched the sky deepen. Archer came up behind her, boots soft in the grass. He didn't speak at first, just stood near, arms folded across his chest. You don't have to stay, he said finally. She tilted her head. You asking me to go? No. Just don't want you feeling like you got no choice. I've had enough of doing things I didn't choose, she said. This, she motioned to the land, the cabin, the sky. This feels like something I get to say yes to. He took a step closer, but didn't touch her. I never thought I'd have anyone here again, he said. Didn't think I'd want to. She looked up at him, her voice soft. Do you? He nodded, slow and steady, like a man not used to speaking things aloud. I do. She stood and reached for his hand. He took it, rough palm curling around hers, and they stood like that as the stars began to bloom above them. Neither one said another word. That night, she didn't sleep on the cot. She moved her blanket beside the hearth, and when Archer stepped inside from his late check on the livestock, he found her there, eyes open, waiting. There's room, she said, voice low. He hesitated, then crossed the floor and lay down beside her, not touching, just close enough to feel her warmth. Hours passed before she whispered, I used to dream of a house like this. Not big, just safe. Not quiet, just peaceful. He turned his head toward her. You've got it now. I think I do. And for the first time in years, she slept without fear. The rains came late that spring, sudden and hard, turning the dry wash behind the cabin into a rushing brown current. Naomi stood at the window as thunder rolled over the hills, her hands wrapped in a flour sack towel from drying dishes. Archer stepped in from the lean-to, soaked through, his hat dripping, and a fresh scrape across one forearm. You all right? She asked, crossing to him. Fence post gave way near the south line, he said, pulling off his vest. Mule spooked, and nearly took the cart with him. She reached for a tin basin, filled it with warm water, then guided him to sit at the table. He watched her quietly as she cleaned the cut, her brow drawn in concentration. "You ever get used to this kind of life?" she asked after a moment, not meeting his eyes. "Some parts," he said. "Some you just learn how to carry." She nodded, then dipped the cloth again. "I never thought I'd be mending wounds or chasing hens out of the herb patch. But I don't miss what I left behind, not even a little." "You never talk about Ohio." She wrung out the cloth and set it aside. "There wasn't much to hold on to. My uncle ran the farm after our folks died. He was hard in ways that made the house quiet. I used to slip out at night just to breathe." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the edge of the table, his voice low. "You ever wish you'd stayed?" "No," she said, without hesitation. "I'd rather be here, soaked boots and all." He grinned at that, the first she'd seen in days, and something loosened in her chest. As the rain softened to a steady hum, she lit the lamp and began sewing patches on his work shirt. He sat nearby, oiling his saddle straps, the scent of beeswax and leather mixing with the damp earth outside. The quiet between them wasn't empty, it was full and warm, like a quilt pulled over tired shoulders. Later that week, once the creek settled and the skies cleared, they rode out together for the first time. She wore her makeshift skirt tucked into Archer's old trousers, cinched with a length of twine, and rode his second mare, Millie, with a cautious but determined seat. "Keep your weight light in the stirrups," he said as they crossed a shallow stretch. "Let her feel you, not fight you." "Like dancing," she said, adjusting her grip on the reins. He glanced over, surprised. "You dance?" "Used to, with my sister. She taught me the steps from those little instruction cards they printed in the ladies' magazines. Never learned myself." She looked at him sidelong. "Maybe one day, I'll teach you." They reached the ridge above Sycamore Creek by midday. The land stretched wide, golden with new grass, and the air smelled of wet sage and sun-warmed pine. Archer dismounted, tying Dusty to a juniper, and helped her down gently. "Look out there," he said, nodding toward the horizon. "That's my boundary line. Everything past its open range. Feels like the world ends out here," she said, shading her eyes. "Or maybe begins." They sat side by side on a flat rock, her hand brushing his as she leaned back on her palms. "I never believed in luck," she said slowly. "But sometimes I wonder if falling into that canyon wasn't the first good thing that ever happened to me." He didn't answer right away. A hawk circled above them, riding the updrafts in slow, wide arcs. "I was just living before," he said. "Working, eating, sleeping. But since you showed up, it's felt like something more." She looked at him then, not shy, not uncertain. "You think we could build something here? Not just survive, but really build it?" His gaze held hers. "I do, if you want it too." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I do." They rode back slowly, letting the horses pick their way through the muddy trail. By the time the cabin came into view, the sky had deepened to a warm amber, casting long shadows over the porch and corn rows. Inside, Naomi lit the fire while Archer hung the bridles. When he stepped through the door, she turned to face him fully. "I want to stay," she said. "Not just for now. For good. If you'll have me." He crossed the room in 2 steps and took her face gently in his hands. "You already belong here," he said. She nodded, tears forming but not falling. "Then let's make it ours." He kissed her then, slow and certain, like a man who'd waited a long time without knowing what for. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of mesquite and clean soil. And inside, 2 people stood at the edge of something quiet and lasting, where nothing needed to be spoken twice. By early June, the days stretched long and warm, and Naomi began keeping a small ledger by the window where she recorded the hens' laying patterns, the weather, and what seeds had taken root. Her handwriting tilted slightly to the left, careful but sure, and Archer often paused to watch her as he passed through the room, though he never interrupted. One morning after breakfast, he rolled up his sleeves and said, "We need to ride to Jameson's Crossing." Naomi looked up from the ledger. "What's there?" "Postmaster's holding on to a parcel for me, and we could use some salt. Maybe sugar, too." She stood, brushing her hands on her apron. "I'll come." "You sure?" "I've been wanting to see what lies beyond that rise to the east." They set out just after sunrise, the light still soft and gold. Naomi rode Millie with more ease now, her back straight, reins loose but steady. The path led them through cottonwood groves and over dry stone beds where the creek had long since receded, They passed no one until they reached the edge of town, where the road widened and the buildings stood low and weathered. Jameson's Crossing was little more than a cluster of wooden storefronts and a livery stable, but it buzzed with movement. A wagon creaked past with barrels lashed tight, and two boys chased a dog down the dusty lane. Naomi slid from her saddle and smoothed her skirt, casting a curious glance at the mercantile's windows. Inside, Archer greeted the shopkeeper with a nod and stepped to the back counter. Naomi lingered among shelves stacked with bolts of calico, small tins of preserves, and a chipped porcelain doll. She touched the doll's hand lightly, then turned away. "You got someone waiting on you?" the shopkeeper asked Archer, glancing toward Naomi. "No," Archer said, without hesitation. "She's with me." Naomi looked back then, met his eyes, and didn't look away. After the parcel was gathered, a new bridle and a hand-forged hinge for the shed door, they stepped outside again. The sun had risen higher, casting sharp lines across the clapboard buildings. Naomi shaded her face and asked, "Could we stop at the church?" He nodded. "You want to go inside?" "No. Just pass by." They walked the horses slowly past the small white chapel. Its paint was peeling, the bell tower leaning slightly, but the door stood open, and a woman swept the porch with a bundle of sticks bound by twine. Naomi's voice was quiet. "I used to think I'd be married in a place like that. A veil, a crowd, everything a girl's supposed to want." Archer didn't answer right away. She looked over. "But I don't think I ever wanted those things. Not really. I wanted to be seen, to be known, not just chosen for convenience." He rested a hand on her mare's neck, his voice low. "I see you. Every piece." That night, back at the cabin, Naomi unpacked the sugar and salt while Archer tested the new hinge on the shed. She worked in the kitchen without hurry, measuring out a small scoop of flour into a bowl and setting it aside for morning biscuits. Moonlight spilled across the floor when he came back in. He set the bridle on the bench and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I've been thinking," he said. She turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "About what? You ever miss living around people? A town, neighbors, more than just me and the mule? I miss sound sometimes. A fiddle, maybe, or the bustle of a market. But I don't miss being looked through." He walked toward her, stopping just shy of her reach. "We could build more here. A smokehouse. Another room. A place for music." She tilted her head. "A place for a family? If that's what you want." She stepped closer and rested her forehead against his chest. "What I want is a life that's real. Doesn't need to be big or loud. Just true." He wrapped his arms around her slowly, one hand finding the curve of her back. "Then we'll build it, bit by bit." Outside, the wind stirred through the trees. Inside, they stood without speaking, the silence between them full of promise. Neither rushed to move. They didn't need to. Everything they needed was already here. By late July, the hills had turned the color of toasted wheat, and Naomi had taken to walking the ridge at dawn, bareheaded, her skirts gathered in one hand and the other brushing the tips of wild grasses. The mornings were cooler now, and the scent of drying mesquite hung in the air. When she returned to the cabin that morning, Archer was already at the table, writing something with a stub of graphite on the back of a paper sack. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "What are you doing?" He didn't look up. "Figuring how many boards we'll need to add a new room." She came closer, reading upside down. "You planning to build it all yourself?" "If I do, I know it'll hold." She smiled and reached for the kettle. "I could draw it up for you. The room. I've got a fair hand at plans." He glanced at her then, surprised. "You never told me that." "I used to copy house layouts from a book my mother had." She'd roll her eyes, but she kept every one. He pushed the paper toward her. "Then draw it. Show me how you see it." They spent the next hour sketching, heads bent together over the worn table. She drew a small room off the back of the cabin, with a narrow window set just high enough to catch the evening light. He added a shelf along the far wall, and she drew a place for a cradle. Neither said anything about that last part, but when she looked up, Archer's gaze was already on her. He didn't speak, only nodded once, as if the idea had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be named. That afternoon, they rode to the edge of the northern pasture where two cottonwoods had grown close together, their branches tangling overhead. Naomi dismounted first, walking ahead into the dappled shade. Archer followed, tying the reins loosely to a low branch. "There's something I want to ask," he said, his voice low. She turned, brushing hair from her temple with the back of her wrist. I've been thinking on it since you first stepped through my door. Not just because I'm grateful or because it's easy with you. It's more than that. She waited, her breath quiet. I want you to marry me, Naomi. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Because you and me, we make a life I never thought I'd get to have. She walked to him without hesitation, placing her hands flat on his chest. I do want to. I've known it longer than I let myself say. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small ring, simple brass, shaped into a narrow band with a faint twist at the center. I traded for it in Jameson's Crossing 2 years ago. Thought I'd never find the right time. She held out her hand. He slid it onto her finger, and she closed her palm around his. You found me instead, she said. They married 2 days later, beneath the cottonwoods, with the mule dozing nearby and the creek murmuring low behind them. Archer shaved, combed his hair flat, and wore a clean collar she had stitched from leftover muslin. Naomi wore a dress the color of faded cornflower and tucked a sprig of sage behind her ear. He spoke first. I promise to walk beside you, not ahead, and to build whatever you dream, as long as I've breath to swing a hammer. She answered, her voice steady. I'll carry the weight with you, whatever the days bring. I'll share the quiet and the storm. They kissed without ceremony. No witness but the trees. In the weeks that followed, they built the new room together. She sawed boards straight and true, and he hammered them into place. She painted the window frame sky blue, and he carved a small crescent moon into the lintel above the door. They didn't speak often of the future, but it hung between them in small ways. A second cup set out in the morning, a cradle plan pinned to the wall, her hand brushing her belly when she thought he wasn't looking. He noticed, of course. Archer noticed everything about her. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge and the sky turned the color of copper, she stood at the garden fence, one palm resting low on her front. When the baby comes, she said, not turning, I want to name her Clara. After my mother. Archer stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. And if it's a boy? She smiled. Then he can be Miles. For your brother. He kissed her temple, slow and warm. That's a good name. And so the days turned. The garden ripened. The hens grew fat. The rains came again, softer this time, and the creek filled but didn't rage. Naomi's belly swelled, and Archer built a rocking chair with a high back and smooth arms, sanding the wood until it gleamed. When the baby came, it was just passed on, and the wind was gentle. Naomi bore down with quiet grit, her hand locked in Archer's, her sweat falling to the floorboards he had laid. A girl, red-faced and strong-lunged, with a wisp of dark hair. They named her Clara. Naomi held her close, tears sliding silent down her cheeks, and Archer sat beside her, one hand cradling the child's foot, the other wrapped around the woman he'd come to love with everything in him. That night, with the baby asleep in a basket near the hearth, Archer stood at the doorway, watching the stars emerge, scattered and bright. Naomi came to stand beside him, wrapped in a shawl, her body tired, but her eyes clear. You ever think about how far we've come? She asked. He reached for her hand. Every day. She leaned into him, her voice soft. We made something good here. He pulled her close. We did. And we'll keep making it. The wind rustled the cottonwoods down by the creek. Inside, the fire crackled low. A cradle waited in the corner, and on the table sat a cup of cooled tea, a ledger half full, and a sketch of a house with more rooms yet to be built. They stood together in the doorway, still and sure, as the first stars blinked into place above them, and the night stretched wide with promise.